my parents had saved up and purchased a block of land with the benefit of one of those building society lotteries, which was where back in the day the building society would take all of the applications for finance and basically almost put them in a hat and every month pick a couple.
This is Property Investory, where we talk to successful property investors, find out more about their stories, mindset and strategy. I'm Tyron Shum, and in this episode of Property Investory, we're speaking with Margaret Lomas, author of multiple property investing books and mentor to thousands of people around Australia. We'll discover how her education and training and development set her on the road to property investing and how she put everything she owned into starting a new company. Margaret Lomas is arguably Australia's leading property expert, educating and mentoring property investors across the nation for many years. She has poured her property investing expertise into her published books, which have become the go-to Bible for many property investors.
I wrote my first book in 2001, and it was at a time when nobody had really written a book that was useful for property investors. And when I say that, I am aware that Jan Summers had written a very good book called Real Estate Investing. But her position in writing that was from a position of a property investor who really focused very much on the physicality of buying property. So her book was really centered around the notion that you would find an area most likely that you knew quite well that was near where you lived, that you would then seek out a median priced property, and much of her advice centered around what that property needed to look like, how to get one that was tenant friendly, and more about the asset itself. So up until that point in time, nobody had really written a book about property that took more of an economic view and considered all aspects of property investing, including the tax aspects, and being able to identify the right places to buy. So I guess you could say that my book was fairly groundbreaking in that regard, although when I look back at that book now, to me, it's notable by what it misses out on. And I was a fairly novice investor, really, when I wrote that. I'd only bought 7 properties, which today most of my clients have. And to think that I could write a book back then was probably, stretching it a little bit. But I wrote the book and people liked it. And from there, I guess my own journey continued. And I stayed for a long time, one step ahead of the readers, but eventually got to the point where I did build my expertise and was able to write books that were far more useful than that first one.
Over time, some of her earlier books have been compiled to create information which is easily accessible to all property investors, regardless of where they are in their personal journeys.
So I've written 8. To be fair, the 8th one was a rewrite of those first 3. So the first 3 books were part of my how-to series, and each one built a little more on the one prior, and I guess picked up on any of that information that I'd subsequently learned and experienced and had missed in the book before. So it seemed to be a good idea more recently, so about a year and a half ago, to take those first 3 and rewrite them. And they made a really nice, bigger book that had 3 components: a component for brand new beginners, a component for people who were already on the journey, and then a component for people who were possibly even getting to the end of that property investment strategy and thinking about exiting. And it's all in the one book. So it just means that you can buy that at any phase of your journey and get a fair amount of information out of it.
That's great. A lot of people who I've had on the podcast has referenced your books as being the go-to Bible for the property investing industry. It's a well-known resource for everyone to use.
Probably a lot of the difference there is that when I first started writing, I had a real genuine desire to share my knowledge, to tell all of those secrets that the spruikers were charging thousands of dollars for you to come and listen to that weren't really secrets at all. And I really wanted to educate people. These days, really, if you think about it, a lot of people have the opportunity to self-publish, to write ebooks, and many of those books are really a business card for the person writing them or a way for them to sell product. And so I think it's very important for the listeners to understand that there are some good books out there that you can read, but there's also plenty of books that are really written as a promotional tool, and you do have to be careful of those.
In any given day, Lomas spends time talking directly with her clients and prospective investors.
In any given day, I guess I pretty much sit at my computer and do a number of things. I either write scripts for upcoming episodes of the program. I answer the emails that come into me because it's very important to me for people to get answers directly from me. And I also get a lot of questions in through my Facebook page, which I try to answer as well. And work on different ways to get information out there to property investors so that they can invest in property safely, but they're protected from the spruikers. And part of that is my work with the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, which is a not-for-profit association that I was involved really in its inaugural year and was very instrumental in getting that up and off the ground and getting a course developed and making sure that consumers all over Australia, in the absence of regulation by government, have some kind of protection against the people who are just trying to rip them off.
Growing up in southwestern Sydney, Lomas's parents came across good fortune when purchasing a block of land.
Well, I grew up in Sydney, out in a place called Padstow, which at the time was thought to be in the sticks. It's in southwestern Sydney. My parents had saved up and purchased a block of land with the benefit of one of those building society lotteries, which was where back in the day the building society would take all of the applications, full finance, and basically almost put them in a hat and every month pick a couple. So they were lucky enough, while they were living with two children and living with my mother's parents, to win that lottery and be given the finance to buy that block of land. Well, they built a little garage on the back, a shed, I guess, about the size of today's granny flat, with 3 rooms, a little lounge room, a bedroom and a kitchen. And they lived in that for another 5 years while Dad began the construction on the house. He was an electrician, and at the time he had a lot of contacts amongst his mates. He knew plumbers and he knew builders and he knew a lot of tradespeople. And so they all helped each other out at the time. He did the electrical work on someone's house who might have been a plumber who could do the plumbing work on his house. And eventually they built their 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom home that they moved into. And I was born there and lived there my entire life, and right up until I was well moved out of home.
Her schooling, though cut short, would lead her into an unexpected journey.
When I was in year 10, I always had a fairly strong sense of justice, and I went to a girls' school, which was a public school. And at the time, our school didn't allow any of the girls to wear long pants in winter, and I thought that was unjust. So I made a decision that I would, it's a very long time ago when you wore hats and gloves, but dresses. And I made the decision that while some of the other schools in our area were getting up to date with, the times and allowing their girls to wear long pants, that ours should as well. So I made that decision that I would start a campaign to try to get our school to change. Part of that campaign was me calling in the local, or it wasn't even the local newspaper, it was actually the Sydney newspaper, the Daily Mirror at the time, getting a story, I think on about page 4, wearing trousers to school along with another girl, and then encouraging the entire student body to strike over the issue. Now, that didn't go down well with the principal, who promptly decided that I needed to be expelled from the school, which I was. I was lucky at the time, though, because the principal of a nearby school, who had formerly been the deputy principal to the principal who'd expelled me and didn't like her, offered to take me into her school, which I did.
After a while, Lomas felt very unsettled.
despite the fact that I'd done very well in school, in primary school, and in fact was dux at the school, I didn't do well at all in my high school certificate, and I essentially failed that. Now, straight after school, I became an exchange student for a year, and I lived in Jakarta, Indonesia for a year, which was a great experience for me and definitely changed a lot of my attitudes. And I came back from overseas with two career paths in mind. The first one was that I was going to go back to school, redo my high school certificate, and qualify for medical school. The second career path was that I was going to come back from overseas and enroll in the National Institute of Dramatic Art and become an actor. Neither of them eventuated, because instead, the day after I got back, I met my husband, or the man who would become my husband. We decided quickly that we would get married, and instead I needed to work. I needed to get a job.
Lomas found a job with a bank, which was very common for girls in her year.
Most girls left school in year 10 and then went and worked for a bank. And I didn't want to do that because I'd chosen not to in year 10. And here I was back 3 years later getting a job in a bank. But pretty quickly in that bank, I decided that I didn't want to work in the bank, but I wouldn't mind being in the training department of the bank. And that was the Bank of New South Wales then, which became Westpac. And after a lot of harassing and hounding of everyone I could find in that bank, who kept telling me that I needed 5 years experience, I needed to be 25 years of age, I finally broke everybody down and got moved to the training centre when I was just 21 after 2 years in the bank. And that was really the beginning of a career for me, because training and development became something that I went back to night school to learn, 4 years at night school, trudging up the hill after I worked 3 nights a week to qualify with a diploma in human resource management, specialising in training and development. And I went on to have my own training company. My early career was very much centred around the training area.
From there, Lomas was proactive and did everything she could to get ahead.
So I was married and I had 2 children, and I was working at the time. What had happened was, after I left the bank to have my first child, I needed to work because we didn't have any money, and I went and got a job in a chemist on the weekends. I'd worked part-time in a pharmacy since I was 14, and so I was able to do that part-time on the weekends. The chemist owner also owned at the time a chain of video stores when videos had first come out, and that chain was called Hollywood Boulevard. And he found out about my training background and then sought me out to help him with some training of the managers. Every time he opened a new store, he needed to train the managers. And so he got me to design a training program for these managers, which I had the skills to do. And from there, I went on and started my own training company.
As Lomas couldn't afford to buy in Sydney, she drew her attention to Perth, where her brother lived and where work was readily available.
When we first arrived there, I did a whole lot of different things. I started a shop, I opened a baby store, employed women to sew for me. I worked at the YMCA running baby massage and kinder gym classes. And I did everything that you could imagine to get work, but still had my skills and experience in training and human resource management behind me. So eventually I decided that I wanted to get back into that corporate world, and I got a job for a community-based service that was funded by the Department of Training and Development. And my job there was to run a small project where I trained mentors who would go on and help unemployed people. So this would be, 1987, 1988. And I managed to get this job, which was a full-time position, and it was a job that was funded every year by the Department of Training and Development. So you spent 3 months a year writing your tenders to try to get money for the following year. But in between time, I was training mentors, running these training programs and overseeing the relationship between the mentor and the job seeker, and basically helping them by helping them to understand how to write resumes, how to go for jobs, I did interview training. I did all of that kind of thing, which all came from my background in training and development, and my time in the bank certainly gave me a lot of skills in training. And I credit the fact that I can effectively public speak today to my time in the bank's training department, because it was a very good training ground for me.
After separating from her husband and raising 3 children under 5 years old on her own, her life changed.
Along the way, met my now husband, who was a police officer at the time. He'd helped me out with a few issues that I was having, and we ended up together and married and had 2 more children. Now, it was around this time, so we're talking now around 1990, that again, I was still the girl who did everything I could to try to get ahead. I was running a training company then. I'd started another training company in Perth. I was the person who wrote the first ever Train the Trainer course and had that nationally accredited. I was offering that course. I was tendering for courses through the government, so I would run courses for Centrelink at the time. They'd be either job search courses or personal development courses, a range of things. I was doing little bits and pieces of everything. And I can remember saying to my husband, if we buy a computer, and computers were very expensive at the time, they were about $5,000, and if we buy a computer and a printer, I can add to our income by writing resumes and application letters for people at night. So I convinced him we needed to take out this finance plan and buy this computer, which we did. And we bought the computer and I started to write these application letters. I advertised in the local paper and I got tons of people who really loved the letters that I wrote, and I was helping people to get into work. And I was doing all of this in my spare time while I had 5 children under 10 and a training business and anything else I can think of at the time.
Then another opportunity arose which allowed her to show others how to pay off their mortgages early, which led her and her husband to start their own business.
One night, one of the clients who I was helping get a job in the mining industry came to the house and he said, I have to leave early tonight because a financial advisor is coming to my house to tell me how to pay off my mortgage earlier. Now, I'm always interested in those sorts of things. So I said, you need to tell him to ring me because I want to pay off my mortgage earlier as well. So the next day I got a call from the fellow who proceeded to come around and see me and told me about a new system where you could get a line of credit, you could use a credit card, and by putting all your expenses on the credit card and holding your money in your line of credit for a while, you could pay off your line of credit quicker and you'd be out of your loan in 15 years instead of 30, and you'd save $100,000 in interest. Now, I liked the sound of that, but I didn't like the sound of the $2,000 that I had to pay him to help me do it. So I said, well, I can do that on my own. And he said, maybe. And he didn't seem to be able to offer me anything for the $2,000 except the idea. So I offered to set all of this up for myself, but work for him part-time and show other people this great new system, because I knew that if I could help other people pay off their mortgage earlier, I could offer a bit of after-sales service as well by helping them with their budgets and encouraging them and motivating them. So he said, yep, that's a great idea. And I became a consultant, I guess, for another company, basically just helping people to pay off their mortgages earlier. And it wasn't long before my husband, who was a police officer at the time and working for the Bureau of Criminal Intelligence, who had a lot of spare time on his hands because we lived in an area where there wasn't a lot of crime activity. It didn't take long for him, who had been also learning a little bit more about computer programming, and me to work out that we could actually do a similar service but offer it in a better way. We were consistently disappointed with the company that I was working for and their delivery of services, and we felt they let people down a lot. So we decided that since we were doing all the work anyway, that we should start our own company, and we did. And that's when Destiny began. And Destiny began in 1994, and it basically began in a lounge room in Perth. And what we did then was simply help people to pay off their mortgages earlier, and we would go out at night and see clients and help them with their budgets, and that's how we began.
Coming up after the break, we'll delve into Lomas's property investing journey as her business took off.
So we started to work on, okay, well, how do we do this better? There was no information out there available, but we started to think about better ways to invest in property and bought a couple more that were really good investments.
How she began to build her portfolio through drawing out equity.
Every time one area was growing, we were able to pull that equity out.
And that's next. I'm Taran Shah, and you're listening to Property Investory. Western Australia is tipped to be the next property hotspot. If you're looking to invest and build in WA, take advantage of the affordable land market and record build times with Plunket Homes. Visit propertyinvestory.com/build to find out why they're WA's most established home builder. With over 150 years of experience, Plunket Homes helps you develop turnkey homes across WA. To get your fixed price demolition or site works and to maximise profits and minimise time, visit propertyinvestory.com/build. And now back to the show. By taking risks, Lomas's property investing journey began when Destiny Financial Solutions started to gain momentum.
It didn't take long for us to decide that we really wanted to build that business into something that was a bit bigger, but at the time, Perth seemed so remote and didn't seem to have the opportunity that we could get if we were on the East Coast. And my whole family was still on the East Coast, and we made that decision that we were going to move the business to the East Coast and start it from there. Now, bear in mind at this point in time, that business was something we did on top of our own regular jobs. So my husband had a job in the police force and I had my training company, which was getting a fair amount of work. And all of our friends thought that we were probably the most successful couple they knew, even though, you know, in light of, I guess, how you think of successful couples today, we probably weren't that successful, but we looked it to everybody else. And we just made the decision that we would throw in all of our jobs, sell everything we owned and move to the East Coast and start this business all over again on the East Coast. Now, no one could really understand why we'd do that. Looking back, I'm not sure why we did it either, because what actually happened was by the time we'd sold everything, including our house, we had $80,000 and we moved over to New South Wales and moved to the Central Coast in 1996 with $80,000 in the bank, 5 children under 10 and no jobs. So it was a bit of a risk at the time, but we've always backed ourselves and we've always been confident that we can come up with some way to make money, so we did it. And the first 6 months, it looked like we'd made a big mistake. We managed to rent a house. We were going through our money fairly quickly at that point in time. But we were out there both pounding the pavement, dropping off leaflets into letterboxes, offering people the chance to pay off their mortgages earlier and save a lot of money in interest. And we knew that we could help people and we were getting the occasional client, but we weren't really getting enough to make a business. And so the decision was made that one of us would probably have to go out and get work because we were down to $20,000 in the bank.
One day, a golden opportunity presented itself, a risk which Lomas was willing to take for her family's future.
I can remember being out one day, again, pounding the pavement, and I came home and my husband said, I called the radio station because I heard a radio ad, and on that radio ad they said that from $400 you could advertise and maybe we should give that a go. So the guys from the radio came out the next day and listened to what we needed to happen and went away and came back 2 days later with a proposal for us for a radio campaign that was going to cost $18,000. And we had $20,000 in the bank. And that was the sum total of our entire assets, apart from some secondhand furniture that we had in the house. So we talked about it for 24 hours and then we decided to do two things. Firstly, we decided that we would go ahead with the campaign. And secondly, we decided that since we promised the kids when we moved that as we were going to be a bit closer to Movie World on the Gold Coast, we'd take them there. We thought we should spend the remaining $2,000 on a holiday to Movie World. Just in case it didn't all work out and we were flat broke, at least we would have the holiday to remember. So the fellas from the radio station prepared the campaign, and it was going to be a 4-week campaign. And they had came out and they talked us through the fact that with radio, you need repetition, that we couldn't get stressed out if nothing happened in the first week or two, and that if there was something else we could do in that first week or two to take our minds off it, that would be a good idea. So I said, how about we go to Movie World? That's the perfect chance for us to do that. So they said, good idea, go to Movie World. So on the Monday morning of our first ad was due to go on just after the news at 9. We packed the family up into the Falcon and shoved everyone in the back, and just in case, we diverted the phones to the brick mobile that we owned at the time, and we set off. And somewhere around Taree, 9 o'clock came, and we knew that the ad was going to go on. We couldn't hear it because we were out of radio range at that time. But 3 minutes past 9, my phone began to ring. And I had all the kids in the car, so I'm turning around to the kids every time the phone rang saying, everyone be quiet. And this includes a baby. And then I would answer the phone and I would say, good morning, welcome to Destiny, how may I help you? And for that entire trip to the Gold Coast, the phone did not stop ringing. So by the time we got to the Gold Coast, we had our diaries fully booked for 3 months with appointments to hear about this great way to pay off your mortgage early. And the rest is history. We began Destiny pretty much from there and didn't look back.
This manoeuvre, although risky, was a catalyst for how Lomas considered her financial situation and encouraged her to learn more about positive cash flow.
And when we first started the business, all we were really doing was helping our clients to pay off their mortgages earlier, but we were doing that for ourselves as well. And so it wasn't long before we started looking around for ways to improve our wealth. And we both liked the idea of property investing, but didn't have a clue how to invest in property. And I read Jan Summers' book and got a couple of ideas, and we went out and bought a couple of investment properties of our own. But fairly quickly, we were able to look back at those investment properties and work out what we did well and what we did badly. And my husband had been reading a bit about positive cash flow investing, and he'd been becoming interested in that concept. And he worked out at the time that of the 3 properties that we bought, 1 was positive cash flow and 2 weren't. And then we also worked out that with all of them, we hadn't really thought too much about where we were buying. We bought them off pretty much spruikers who sold the benefits of the property, but we didn't think too much about the areas. So we started to work on, okay, well, how do we do this better? There was no information out there available, but we started to think about better ways to invest in property and bought a couple more that were really good investments. And then our clients started to say, we want to do that too. We talk about our investments, and they started to need the guidance. So when we began really advising on property investing, we were really only 6 properties ahead of our clients at the time. But I wrote the first book. More and more clients started to come to see us. The book was obviously a national publication, so we started to get inquiries from all over the country, and that gave us the opportunity to start to open up in new places and open new branches. And pretty soon we had an office in most states, and we were really, really flying along.
However, it was years before her properties began to work for her.
More or less, we bought a property up front to live in, which had gained value fairly quickly. So it was really only the first one investment property that we needed to bring cash in, and after that, every other property has been funded through equity. But having said that, the first couple of years of Destiny, we didn't make any money. All of the money we were making was going out to wages for the staff that we had. And in fact, there were years there where we were using our personal line of credit to fund the operations of Destiny. So we weren't really getting very far ahead, even with those first 6 properties. Every step forward in equity we would take steps backward in either using some of that line of credit to fund the business or to fund the next property purchase. So really for the first 5 years, if you had a look at our equity position, that didn't change much. We were getting a wider spread of assets, but we definitely weren't getting ahead in our net worth at that point in time.
So at what point in time did that all start to change when you could actually see that this portfolio was starting to reap its benefits and start to pay some passive income and also growing further with your equity?
It was really the second 5 years, and once we had about 7 or 8 properties under our belt. You know, the wider base that you can get, and as long as it's a diversified base and situated in different areas, because, you know, one area is going to grow and stabilise and grow and stabilise, and you don't want all of your properties in that one area when it's stabilising, because then you're not getting any equity in those years. So we were careful to buy those first 7 or 8 properties in different states. We had some in New South Wales, we had some in Perth, we had, I think, one in South Australia, we had some in Queensland, and one in Darwin. And they were growing at different rates. So every time one area was growing, we were able to pull that equity out. But after we had those 7 or 8 there, they were all going through periods of time where they were growing pretty well and creating more equity than we needed for that next purchase. So it's really that wider base that makes a big difference to you. And I would say for any property investor, don't expect too much in that first 5 years, unless your timing is exceptional with every purchase, which it isn't going to be. But that second 5 years should start to see something happen for you.
Many investors have negative experiences when investing into property, and for Lomas, not doing her due diligence impacted her in this way when she made her very first investment.
I guess the first bad investment that I made was my first one, and that was because I bought it from a guy in a brown suit who came into my house and told me about this wonderful area and all of the wonderful things it was going to bring to me, and I did absolutely no due diligence in checking whether what he was telling me was even correct or based on anything. And we bought a 2-bedroom unit in Cairns at a time when there was a pipeline supply that you wouldn't believe. And I didn't even think about the fact that Cairns was going to be an itinerant market that meant that it could never have sustainable growth. So Cairns has what I call, I guess, almost a sympathetic growth, where the sympathies of property investors tell the fortunes of how the growth occurs in Cairns. There's nothing else to create real growth in Cairns because it's 100% specifically tourism. Or 80% tourism and 20% retirement mecca. And so we don't have the big important things in that area that we need to grow property, which is infrastructure, which is employment and population growth in the family demographic. What we do see is plenty of renters who come there for the work. We see people move in and out of Cairns very quickly. People think it's going to be a great place to live there, and some people fall in love with it and other people find it oppressively hot and move back out again. And because we also don't have those underlying employment drivers, what we will see from Cairns will only ever be growth driven by the sentiment of investors who suddenly all flock there because it's cheap and you're getting a good cash flow, and they'll push prices up for a while, and then that affects the cash flow because the rents don't go up, and then those same investors leave again and the properties go down. And properties in Cairns do go up and down. And in the period of time that I've held my property, it's gone from the $160,000 that I paid to it down to the $140,000 that it was probably really worth because I was ripped off by the spruiker, up to $225,000 and $230,000 at one point, valued by the bank, back down. And I think at the moment, after 17 years, it's worth what I paid for it.
Another bad investment came about in a small town in Queensland, where she was eventually forced to cut her losses.
We bought, I guess emotionally, a block of land in a little town called Agnes Water. Look, to be fair to me, at the time I did speak with council who told me that I could get 3 properties on that one block. And so I had thought if I build the 3, I can sell 2 for a profit, hopefully almost pay off my input and then have a rental, or at least a rental with a low mortgage, and it could be something that over time might be okay. I always knew Agnes Water was a speculative investment, but I thought I was really covering my bases by being able to put in place a strategy that allowed me to reduce my mortgage on that by building these 3 and then selling them. Not long after I settled on that property, I contacted council to find that no, the town plan had changed. the guy who told me I could do 3 knew the town plan was changing and that I'd be lucky to get 2 on it. And then after I did the feasibility on the 2, just with the high construction costs in the area, it came out to being so negative cash flow for me in terms of what I could get on rental that it just wasn't worth having. Now, unfortunately, because I do lead a busy life, one of my weaknesses is that I probably don't pay attention to some of those things as well as I could. And we sat on that block of land for probably 7 or 8 years, paying the interest on that mortgage for all of that time before I finally took my own advice and decided to cut the losses on that. So we bought that property for $330,000 and we sold it. We were fortunate to get $290 for it. And I say fortunate because at one stage there it was probably worth in the low 200s. And we had paid all of that interest along the way. So that was a very costly lesson for me and a lot of money lost on that particular deal.
Despite this, many property investments have paid off for Lomas, such as a purchase she made in Darwin.
We bought a unit in Darwin, and while Darwin isn't doing as well now as it has done, for me it's still doing very well because I purchased a unit in Darwin because I could just see what was coming there with mining, with improved interest, with affordability, and we only paid $120,000 for that unit. Now, I could probably only sell it today for maybe $350,000, but that's still a pretty good result. And at one stage it was definitely worth well over 400, but I also get a really good rent on that. So my rental return on that sitting at about 14%, and that's without any of the tax breaks that I'm getting as well. So I'm getting a really good rent on my initial purchase price. And when I bought there, everyone just said to me, why on God's green earth would you buy in Darwin? And I just felt and knew from my research that something was coming to Darwin, and I was correct. I did the same thing in Perth. I bought a property in Perth on a very big block at the beginning of 2 cul-de-sacs, so it's got 3 street frontages, with a house that was built to one side or closer to the front of the block. And I paid $125,000 for that. I was able to put a fence down the back and build a second dwelling. At the time, I couldn't subdivide, although I could today. The town plan has changed because it is a 1,000 square metre block. But I was able to build a second dwelling, and construction costs were low at the time, so I paid $120,000 for a second dwelling, and that faces the other street, so it has its own entrance. And they'd be worth probably $300,000 each today, and I'm getting $400 a week on each of them. So $240,000 buy-in price for an over $600,000, probably $650,000 equity position today with $800 a week rent isn't a bad one.
So, inspired by this episode and Margaret Lomas' property investing journey, we'll continue the conversation in a future episode. We'll discuss how to apply the strategy.
So it is a buy and hold strategy, but also it is a strategy of understanding that the debate about whether you should buy a cash flow property or a growth property is really a moot one.
To success habits for property investing.
That work ethic has gotten me through all of the jobs I've ever had to do just by knowing that I've got to get up in the morning and I've got to go.
And that's next time on a future episode of Property Investory. Also, if you haven't subscribed to receive your free property case studies that I only send out exclusively via email, you can text me your email address to 04 99 88 10 40 to subscribe. These real case studies are from experienced property investors where they share specific numbers of their portfolio, the strategies, and much more. Simply text me your email address to 04 99 88 10 40 to get your free case studies. Thanks for listening.